Hey, everybody, it's Rob with National Fire Radio. I'm here with our co-host of our new show, Rush the Bus. So I'm going to do some introductions real quick. We've got Julie and Peter. Say hi.
Hello.
And then we have our guest tonight, who I don't know anything about, but this is going to be awesome because Julie and Peter vouched for her. So that's what I'm excited about. But Nancy's here. Nancy, what's your full name?
Nancy Gwillym.
And you work for?
I'm a lieutenant at Station 57 for the fire department.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah,
all right.
New York City.
So Nancy, hi.
Hi.
So we're starting a podcast called Rush the Bus, and we're trying to get stories of people who've been on the ambulance, and what their career's been like, what it's like being on the ambulance and talking in front of a microphone.
Oh, there you go.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, Nancy. When did you start?
I started in 1988.
1988.
My mom moved to Florida, so I had to get a job, and this was in the news. And it was in the paper, which is how we got jobs back then.
Okay.
And they trained me. I went to EMT school with them. I became a paramedic through them.
Okay.
And they trained me to be a lieutenant. So everything I've done is completely on them.
Okay.
Like they're responsible for everything. I did nothing on the outside, nothing.
Wow. So you came on when, what was the, you were with Health and Hospitals, right?
Yeah, it was Health and Hospitals.
Oh, wow.
We were green, and it was a very unflattering uniform. We had to buy our own.
Okay.
Wow.
And it was a white shirt, which is ridiculous. And they all get, and because we bought our own, we didn't have that many. So the white shirts got really grungy looking at some point. And, you didn't want to replace them because we earned no, it was like you have to buy your, and I was really young then, with an apartment, and we bought 4 shirts.
Nancy, so kind of give me a little bit of the history, because I know New York City EMS, and then, I call it the transition.
Yeah.
But so you started, it was Health and
Hospitals, and we worked, it was basically, it's a separate agency out of the Health and Hospitals Corporation. It was basically a forgotten unit in a corner of their paperwork somewhere, and I worked out of a little tiny station at a Bellevue Hospital, which is now Station 8, I believe.
Okay.
And it was very small, and there were about 4 stations, I think, in Manhattan at the time, and they were mostly hospital-based. One of them was Metropolitan in Harlem, and then there was Gouverneur downtown, which wasn't really a hospital anymore when I at least started.
Oh, that's over by Cherry Street, right?
Yeah,
it's hidden back in there.
Yeah,
okay.
And now it's
like a
separate
nursing
outpost.
home.
Nursing home or something. It's really posh looking.
Yes.
Yeah.
The city's changed very much in a short period of time.
When you first came out, so they trained you to be an EMT.
Yes.
Health and Hospitals. How long was it?
Oh, it was really actually a long time. When I started, they told us to show up on February 1st, and I quit my job and showed up on February 1st.
What time did you have to be there?
7 o'clock.
Okay.
And then they told us all to come back in a month.
Oh my God.
So wait, so you quit your job.
Yes.
They told you to be there at 7 o'clock.
Yes, we
and
showed
then they
up.
said come back in a month.
Come back in a month.
Wow.
And then and a month later,
Right.
it started in March 1st.
Right.
March 1st.
What'd you do in the month?
I got a temporary job. And that was actually really good. I worked in an office for, it was a journalist. They put out magazines for various trades and stuff like that. And that was a really decent job. And they were like, come to us full time. And I was like, no, I'm going to go on the ambulance.
Right.
And they're like, really? You're going to do that? And I said, yeah. And then
did you have to pay for a filing back then? Or was it just like, please come?
Yeah, I didn't have to pay for anything.
Okay.
I remember I came in and like the first day we took a test. There were like 80 people that came up, and they all took a test. And I was like, nervous. They're going to give us a math test, and they're going to give us, a reading. And it was kind of ridiculously easy. And I thought, this is a trick question, or something. And no, but a lot of people failed it. And then the rest of us all became a bunch of cadet classes. I know there was 5, 6, and 7 out of that group.
Yeah.
And I was cadet 6.
Do you remember? Do you remember how many people were in your class when you came out?
It was like 40. It was very big. It was a decent size. And it was. And some of those people are still working.
Really?
Well, like Bastine.
Oh, he's from your class
Yes,
too?
Bastine was in my class.
Okay.
And, actually, not that many are working there. But,
All right. So he's almost done. I know he's counting his days.
Yeah, I know.
So
am I.
Yeah. So you came out and with the green uniforms, the green pants guys.
Yeah.
And so you came out, and where'd you go from there?
I went to Bellevue, and I spent all my BLS time at Bellevue.
Okay.
And it was about 8 or 9 years BLS. And then I was tour 2 BLS. I was tour 3 ALS, and now I'm tour. Well, then tour 1.
What's the tour?
Yeah, what were your tours from?
Well,
No, I mean like the tour, like you said, tour 1, tour 2, tour.
Tour
like
1
those?
is the evening. It's the overnight, and tour 2 is the daytime, and tour 3 is the evening.
Okay.
And I worked 9 to 5 BLS, which in
and
Manhattan.
You were coming from where?
Oh my gosh.
I lived in Queens and then Brooklyn for some of it. It was like
just
That had been horrendous.
yeah, it was
hour.
crazy.
What time did you leave for work in the morning? Get
Oh
there
my
at 9.
God, probably like 7, and it was terrible. I used to get there very early just because it was.
Did you mutual? When I mean mutual, did you do like?
I didn't
So
really
you swap
mutual.
with
I
somebody
just
else?
stayed, and I loved my partners, so that's
Okay.
why I stayed with it. And longevity with partners isn't very common in our job. You
Yep.
know, like there's you two that.
I know she's
amazing.
like my longest one.
Yeah, I
Usually
know.
They get arrested. Or,
Yeah.
they get arrested. They go.
Move on.
and they
Everybody
quit.
leaves and they
No,
go
no, it might
somewhere
be me.
else. But my BLS partner, I had one BLS partner for the entire duration, and he just retired like 2 years ago or something like that. And my ALS partners were very long term, and now I've been with Neil for
Yeah.
Which
5
is
or 6
great,
years.
you know.
Yeah,
I feel like it makes the job enjoyable when you have a good rapport with
exactly.
somebody, you know.
I agree.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun. My partners actually my BLS partner was very fun to work with, and I was kind of like when I become ALS, this is going to end, but it didn't. It just got better. I had more people that were fun to be with and fun to do things with. And
So what were the ambulances like back then?
oh my God!
I remember you
they
told
were-
us some stories a few weeks ago. There was like carpet
I
in the back or
know.
something. I think.
Yes, it's kind of funny because the
Some of
you
them have
know
wood paneling.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Remember,
there
like
was-
the brown.
we had this awful console with carpet on it, which never gets clean.
Yeah.
Is it in the
and,
back or the front?
That was in the front.
Oh, wow.
I was in the front, and they sent you out with fumes, no air conditioning. There was no such a thing as a radio in the front that worked.
Like music radios or like
yeah, music
or-
radios.
okay.
We had these little buttons that we used to push to tell if we were on scene or going to the hospital or
Okay.
something like that. And if
That's
you want to hear one of
high-tech.
my stories about the intercom system.
Come on, tell us about the
yeah.
Yeah, 'cause, I know what an
I think it
intercom
brings
is.
like great.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It brings some good history too. Is like there's the one thing that I have found in doing EMS is that we don't tell the story of what happened. Like I don't, I mean, I only know from when I started, and I think it was like 98, 99 was when we'll do math later, but and a little bit before that from when my mom volunteered and whatnot. So like I think it's great to capture like what the intercom and all this stuff because this is something that people
Yeah, nobody knows.
don't know about. Like
I know. Well,
The only thing that has an intercom is the rescue truck now.
yeah, and like it makes kind of sense for the rescue truck because they're kind of separated from the front and the back, but it didn't really make sense because you have that little square. You can hear everything between that little square. It's big enough to crawl through if you lose your keys, and you can go in there. But we had, an intercom for some of them came out with this, and it was just, there and nobody used it. But my partner, he was pretty innovative and he was a lot of fun and he could imitate anybody's voice. He was really good at prank phone calls. And I don't know, we had one day that we had some regular that was very mean to us. All the time. And I don't know if he was homeless or not, but he was just a regular of ours. He was mean. And at the time, there was a hospital in Manhattan that had like some sort of like sales pitch of like, we go the extra mile, or I'm not really sure. I don't remember the pitch, but they wanted people to go into their hospital, which is kind of funny because the nurses there were never very receptive to that. Like,
They didn't live up
you
to
know.
the meaning of their slogan.
yeah, everybody in the world, in the hospital world, wants you to bring patients there, except the nurses in the ER.
Yeah.
and
Like, why'd you bring
understandably,
this patient?
yes.
How dare you?
I don't know.
I
Live
know.
in a hospital.
And so, this guy wanted to go to that hospital because he had seen the ads on television or whatever it was, maybe radio, and he wanted to go to that hospital. And we were like, all right, whatever, we'll go there. So, still, I want to point out that he was mean to us and deserved this,
Yeah.
So we're going to the hospital. It was a decent ride, and my partner's driving, and just suddenly, like, the intercom starts working, and he did, like, an old woman's voice, and he said, hello there, Mr. Smith. And he's like, what's that, And she's like, well, I'm going to call her she, just because that's who, she's pretending to be. And she said, this is Harriet. I work in the kitchen at, Hospital XYZ. We're here to take your lunch order. And he said, my lunch order. And she goes, yeah, we go the extra mile. And, we think a well-fed patient is a healthy patient. And here are the three choices. So he chose like pork chops and mashed potatoes.
Oh my gosh.
And something, a dessert, some sort of a full meal. And, and he just looked at me afterwards and he's like, you see, that's why I want to go to this hospital. And so then,
you look of scorn, like,
you should take all your patients here. So my partner goes on the intercom and goes, okay, your order number is like 1, 2, 3, 4. Just remember that 1, 2, 3, 4. So he said, okay, and have a nice day, And so the rest of the ride, he's just like, great, I'm gonna get fed, pork chops, blah blah blah, and I just didn't know what to make of it. He never did this before. It was just out of the blue. We didn't rehearse it. It just came out of nowhere. So I didn't know what to make of it. But I was like, whatever. So we get to the hospital. We take him out of the vehicle. And my partner's like, oh, did you order lunch, And he's like, yes. He's like, yeah, this place, they make really good food, and you're in the middle of the restaurant district. They order this stuff out from, like, top chefs, And he's like, great, yeah. He's like, I ordered the pork chops. And he goes, the pork chops are really wonderful here. You're going to be very happy with them. And then we get closer to the entrance, and he's like, I'm just going to tell you something, though. He says, the nurses here like the food too, and they're going to tell you that you're not entitled to a lunch.
Oh my gosh.
But you've got an order number, right? And he says, yes, 1, 2, 3, 4. He's like, you make sure you let them know that you ordered your lunch and you're entitled to it. And and he's like, thanks for the advice. And so he's like, when do I get my food? And they're like, after you're registered, which is long after we're gone. So
did you come back and see him?
Yes, we saw him later. He was screaming and yelling, and he's like, I know that you probably had my lunch. You look like you enjoy a good plate of pork chops. And the nurses were like, I don't know what's up with this man. He thinks he's getting fed here, and we don't feed people unless they're admitted, and he's just going to be leaving in it.
Wow.
But whatever. They deserved it. She deserved it. He deserved it.
Do that anymore.
No, he probably couldn't get away with that.
311 on us quick.
Yeah.
And that was Manhattan.
Yeah.
Like that was big. The lights shine on you, and
Well, I always thought it was funny. Like I know a couple people who work EMS in New York City outside of Julie and Peter, and like we were walking. I don't know if we were down in the city drinking for something. It might have been like a bachelor party or something. And they're all like, I'll keep moving. And I'm like, what? And I get to the other side of the street. And I'm like, why? And they're like, that's like there's a concerned citizen squad and they don't understand. And I'll just use the name Hector as like a general. That's Hector and he's always here. And they're going to call and then like we're going to show up and they're going to want us to give life-saving treatment to him. But he's just always drinking.
Yeah.
So and it's just like shifted across the side of the street. But it goes back to that. What we can and can't do and what the expectation of us is now. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a different world.
No.
Well, now everyone has cell phones too. So I feel like, the kind of like call for the unconscious type has probably gone up quite a bit because of do-gooders who think like, oh, this person's in the street. They must need an ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
But they're on the subway, leaving the station.
Yeah.
And then you run a goose chase. So I bet you it happens everywhere.
But it does, it because everybody has their phone. I think back in the day, maybe in the 80s or 90s, not everyone was willing to walk to a payphone to call for the guy who's like sleeping on the subway car. But now they're most definitely going to call for that person.
What are, having like starting out in '88, what are some of the industry changes that you've seen that are like that just kind of like, I don't know, like, just do you have an opinion on any of them, or?
I think it's vastly improved in a big, huge way. I'm not one of the people who thinks that the fire department takeover was a bad thing. I think it gave us some better credibility. We were no longer, the stepchildren of health and hospitals, and I think it's a better stepchild of the fire department just because, they recognize that we're still an emergency service. As being part of the hospital-based system, it has, there's a sense to that, but, our care for them ends when we drop them off. We don't spend our time in the ER. We don't really continue the care in the hospital setting, and it's just to treat us as an emergency service is more appropriate than to treat us as a hospital service, just because they're all cleaned up by the time they get to the hospital.
Yeah.
The hospital, the way they treat patients is from the starting points of when we drop them off, and they're like, it's a different kind of care. Like, they don't have to deal with the outside elements and the logistical issues.
Right.
And, there's a lot of like extrication issues and cleanup that they don't really seem to understand happens beforehand, and, the carrying. And
sorry. I just.
No, I was just going to say, we had a patient the other night where I felt like we had to reiterate like several times over to the doctor, like, because she couldn't really understand what the scenario was, like what's going on here.
Everybody told her too.
And I felt, we
like,
had a giant patient who was completely naked, like writhing on the floor, and he was hypoxic, which means he wasn't getting enough oxygen. He also had a GI bleed, so he was like pooping blood pretty much, and then essentially rolling around in it. So it was like, we're trying to help this person, but like we literally can't get our hands on him. I mean, we're already getting covered in stuff, and then we had to sedate him because we couldn't like safely handle him, like for him or for us to be safe. And then when we took him to the hospital, like while we were in the truck, he ended up going into respiratory arrest and then eventually cardiac arrest. And we got to the hospital and we're explaining it, and the doctor had to come out, and she kept asking, well, was this like an asthma? And we're like, no, like it's like he had a GI bleed and this is what it was. And she was like, yeah, but why is this like, where, like, it was like the question she was asking. I was like, I finally had to say, like, there was like a few of us in a dark hallway, like a hallway that had no light, and it was dark.
Close your eyes. The conditions are
and
right.
there was like poop and blood all over the floor. Everyone's sliding in it, because I feel like as a doctor, like you don't get that sense. When you're in the hospital, you get this person who we present to you on a bed, and now they're in arrest, unfortunately. But like you didn't see the nightmare that like 40 minutes ago was this situation that we were undertaking. So it's like not quite a hospital service.
Yeah,
it's like this is like what we
Mm-hmm.
were with firefighters on this job. Like we were dealing with it with the fire guys.
Well, and like with the hospital stuff, I always heard this. Like this is something over my career that I've heard with hospital-based EMS services, was that like it always came out, well, one of the advantages to the hospital is that this can generate revenue for the hospital by bringing patients here. And I always said, like, well, that's kind of weird. Like, so you have, like, I mean, it's good you have an ambulance that you're providing it into a 911 system, but like when you're almost
profiting,
steering people to come, like
steering.
Like now it's like to me, I was just like, well, that's just seems shady, like I mean,
illegal.
Yeah.
And it's like, all right, well, cool.
I know.
And it just, like you said, I think it's refreshing to hear about like how this like becomes an emergency service versus the hospital-based service, because honestly, for myself, that's the first time that I've really kind of heard that angle before when it comes to the transfer to the fire department. It's always been like some hardcore New York City EMS people were like, this and that. And you don't know what it was like. And I'm like, no, I'm sorry.
It was very different, and it wasn't necessarily because of the switchover. It's just because of time, like now we have cell phones and we have better technology, although our machinery was much smaller back then, and now they're much heavier. And the life pack that I used to use was much easier to carry. It was lighter. Like when it knocked into my leg, it created a bruise, but not such a well-defined bruise, And I don't know, everything just seems to be much heavier now.
What life pack did you start out with?
I think it was a 12.
Okay.
It was the one right before the one you used now.
Nice.
Yeah,
So when you came out BOS and we sit on cross streets, where did you sit? Do you remember where you sat?
My original one
Your
was
original cross
I was moved eventually, but my original one was 2nd Avenue on like 34th Street.
Okay.
Right in Midtown.
Midtown, all right.
And then eventually they changed us all around, and I became 14 Boy, which is the Upper West Side. But it still came out of Bellevue because
you drove all that way.
Yeah, it should have been. Ride. Yeah, it should have been a metropolitan unit that covered that area, but they didn't have the space or something.
Yeah.
So we covered it. So
do you remember how many units came out of 8s back then?
I'm gonna say a lot. It was like about 10.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it was a decent number because there were only 4 stations.
So yeah, you have a lot.
But I mean, it expanded over time. They used to be like TAC units that used to just cover whatever area the city was lacking. I believe we're starting to do that again, which I think is a good idea.
Yeah.
But sometimes they were there and then they moved them elsewhere and then eliminated. And at one time they started the hazmat stuff. I think we used to have a hazmat unit over there, but then that also got changed somehow, and I don't really remember about that.
And there was a lot more voluntary hospitals back then.
Yeah, it was Manhattan still is very much a voluntary hospital area. But yeah, it was all of our ALS was basically from the voluntary.
Did you work anywhere else other than Manhattan?
Not BLS, no.
Not BLS.
So then when you went to medic school, you went with the fire department also?
They trained me for everything.
You went to the fire. You went to HHC's medic program.
No, we were the first fire department paramedic class. Prior to that, there was no medic classes for like about 5 years. I'm going to say they did it periodically, and then they ran out of funding here and there. And I was like, I'm going to the next one. And then there was no next one. And then when they eventually started it up again, like when the fire department took over, they wanted to. This was a big thing on their priority list to keep doing this, and they were only going to take 17 people because they were going to take people from the prior list. And I was one of the 17.
So you had to take a test to get in there?
Yeah.
How hard was that back then?
I thought it was pretty difficult, and there was also an interview. And, I loved that class. I still have friends from that class.
What year did you? I don't want to date you.
Oh,
what year was that?
Oh, that was 97.
97. Okay. All right.
Yeah. So.
And did you do it up at Fort Totten?
It was at Fort Totten, and we did the same thing that they do now, basically. You know, we had a burn center rotation, which apparently just recently got.
I still had the burn center rotation when I was
taken out.
I don't know why. I thought that was
no, that was really good. That was one of the best ones.
Yeah. Because you get to go to Cornell, and you know, we even did pediatric. I don't know if we did it or they just like a nurse took me there, but I got to do the pediatric burn center and the adult burn center, which was interesting. Luckily, it was like nothing horrifying, but you know,
some of the rotations that they give you, like the hospitals took it upon themselves to teach us more.
Yes,
you know, which I thought was really good.
Yeah,
like there was one, I think it was an OBGYN rotation where we were getting nothing. You know, I don't think I saw a single baby born the entire time I was in mine. And they took us over to like the blood lab, and we learned about how they do things there, and that was pretty interesting.
That's cool.
And at that time, taking bloods on patients was a routine thing, and it was good to know like how much you needed in the tube and stuff like that.
Yeah, we only draw bloods now for if we have somebody with CO poisoning before we get hydroxycobalamin.
I think when I got to do my rotations, like one of the cool ones, which I don't know if they go there anymore, was Kingsbrook Jewish. And I guess because at the time, like the fire department had like a good rapport with them. And when the ER was like slow, one of the doctors in the front would take us to fast track and let us like do the interviews with the patients.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Like he
That's
like,
cool.
I thought it was very interesting. You know, I was like, I have my lab coat. I look like I'm a doctor. I'm not even a paramedic, you know.
But probably filling in for somebody who come to work that day.
Like we have no PAs today, so you're up.
So how long was medic school back then?
It was the same. It was about 9 months.
9 months.
Yeah,
okay. And then, do you remember what unit you precepted on?
It was at a Metropolitan. I remember picking it, and I had seniority, so I got it over. Like a lot of people fought for it, and they were a lot of fun. I think they work in Connecticut now, the two of them.
Okay.
And they were a really good pair that had been together for a very long time. And I believe they're still somewhat together wherever it is that they work now.
Oh,
you know,
nice.
which was a lot of fun. And they were really good. But I don't
That was
remember.
your first unit out of the academy?
No, that was my intern unit.
Your intern
and
unit.
then
Okay.
when you came out, they just threw you on a truck. You didn't have an intern period like you have now.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you did, but I mean, you didn't work with your partner, but it wasn't a specific internship unit. You just got whatever number of hours.
Thrown to the mix.
Yeah. And if you finished that in 2 months, yay.
That's it.
Oh, wow.
You know, you could basically, but I didn't. I don't think.
So you went up to Metropolitan then first as ALS? Like
No, as ALS, I went to Brooklyn.
okay.
I went to 39.
39 on...
Was
that-
39?
It was on Pennsylvania.
It was still in Pennsylvania.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
and that was fun. And then when 44 opened, our unit was going to go to 44, and then we became 44.
Still on Rockaway?
Yeah.
Rockaway Avenue?
I was there when it opened.
Nice.
And that was fun. That was a really good place to work. That's where I met my spouse. And it was a lot of fun. We had great supervisors that like I try to emulate. And it was a really nice station for a long time.
Okay.
The people there were great, and I have nothing but good memories. It was a hellhole to work in. You know, there's nothing to eat.
Yeah.
And
what's like you say? There's nothing to eat, and it's a hellhole to work in. Like,
there's no stores. There's no restaurants. There's no fast food even after 6 p.m. Basically.
And where is this?
It was East New York.
Oh, East New York. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I've heard stories.
You'd have to really travel to.
Yeah.
And it was just all like it was very violent. Like the crime rate was like through the roof back then. And
what year was this, Nancy?
and it was the early 2000s, and I think the 7-5 was still going rate of the busiest precinct.
Yeah.
And it was crazy, you know, but it was good for us, you know, because we like trauma and
Yeah.
everything like that. Like there was no shortage of shootings. When I went to Manhattan, I never had a gunshot wound, not once. And then you go to Brooklyn, and it's like, oh, it's no big deal, you know.
You remember how many you were doing a day back then?
Shootings, like I want to say about 2 a week,
2 a week,
roughly,
okay.
you know. But like it was all spread out. It was mostly a BLS call type, you know. So
that's the one thing with us that nobody knows, that shootings and stabbings are all BLS. Everywhere else you get the medics, you know.
Yeah.
So
But really, BLS, you're going to BLS these jobs. I mean, most of it. Like
unless we come in.
well, we come and steal them, but like otherwise, and we will start a line. But like we're doing BLS.
Yeah,
I mean, that's what you need for those calls.
exactly.
You know, they need an operating room. They don't need.
Yeah, you don't need me.
They don't need a bunch of silliness that we're, you know.
I think we were up in the Hudson Valley. We've been doing the rescue task force stuff, and it's so much fun to watch people freak out and like, all right, hey, we're gonna do rescue task force stuff, and they're like, that's really the job of the paramedic, and you know this and that. I'm like, no, like it's like they don't like. I bet you if we ask the paramedics, they're gonna do the same stuff we're doing first before they even think about any of the ALS care. So like, just do it, and it's.
I think everybody forgets that BLS and diesel really saves lives.
Yeah.
So
BLS
it's not
before
paramedics.
ALS. You know.
And I think because the BLS are just so young and new, they don't really realize how much they can do on their own.
So going on that, you say young and new. When you came on, what were the
people have loads of experience, you know.
So
like it took me a long
that,
time to go to medic school, mostly because I was waiting for the class.
Okay.
But you know, people did have a decent amount of time on the job. But I mean, people still were leaving like they do now.
Yeah.
You know, but it wasn't all in one big group.
Okay.
Whereas now they take 300 at a clip, and you know, are devastated by that. Whereas before, it used to just be like 2 or 3 going to PD, and PD was the big draw back then. Most people went to PD, and you know, or they went to various schools like health and hospitals. One of the good things about them was that they let you become a nurse, or they had respiratory therapy as well, and you could do that through them for free. Like you'd go full time, but you know that doesn't happen anymore in our
No. Well, they probably were like losing people.
Yeah, and,
you know?
and you'd be losing them to something that you don't have.
Yeah.
You know, whereas now you were losing them, but they're going to fire.
Yep.
You know, so they're still in-house, you know.
What was some of the stuff that the older people told you back then, for as far as like the experience?
Yeah,
You know, like when you say like people were experienced back then compared to now, like.
I mean, they were comfortable with things. You know, they were comfortable handling a lot of things on their own, like violent patients.
Yeah.
You know, it was almost unheard of to ask for help for that. Which I think one of the good things about the BLS asking for ALS on gunshot wounds is that now you have more people at least to deal with the crowds and stuff like that, because the crowds are sometimes, you know, you don't know who the bad guy is sometimes.
I think that for a lot of people too, if you've never had a crowd turn on you, or and like and it's hard to describe because you're talking to providers out there who've never experienced an act of violence in a poor community, and all of a sudden there's this palatable shift in the energy.
Yeah.
I don't even think it has to be like that type of community. It could be anywhere.
It could be anywhere.
When I worked in Pennsylvania, I was more nervous, you know, something happened out there because the cops aren't coming and everybody can shoot.
Yeah.
You know, so a lot of people like to stay on outside. You need to get inside, you know.
Yeah, you go into strange people's homes.
Get back in your truck as quick as you can.
Exactly.
So.
Yeah, and that's like, and just kind of hearing that, like as far as like, you know, what you used to handle on your own without any assistance, and now it's kind of.
And you go into these strange homes, you know, like it could be a rich person, they could be crazy, you know.
Yeah, like
they
you
could
never know what you're walking into.
Exactly. You know, and the some of the homes, you know, where you go to, like, it's not even the patient, but their relatives and, you know, the neighbors, you know, and they've all got something to say. And I think it's probably worse now because I think social media gives you a voice that you didn't have before.
Yes.
And people become more likely to say things that they would have kept to themselves, and they're more likely to question things. And, you should see some of the complaint letters that, you get sometimes, and people come to our station and knock on the door to complain about something that happened 3 months earlier. And they're just as fired up as the day it happened, about, I left my phone in the vehicle and they took it, and, you just notice it's missing now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Later.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just, I think that people are more assertive, which sometimes is good and sometimes it's bad. It's bad for us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It can be.
Because a lot of people don't know what we're supposed to do, and they think you're just supposed to pick them up and drag them to the ambulance and drive away, and they don't really realize that. Like, when people complain about the cost of the ambulance, they just think it should be the equivalent of a taxi cab fare.
Yeah.
And, when they find out that the bill is like
Yeah.
$1,300, it's like, well, what is that for? And like, there's salary involved and that equipment.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the monitors list?
Yeah,
Like
and
$40,000,
We're also,
like,
depending on the call type, we're actually doing what they would do in a triage
Yeah.
in the emergency room. If
Nobody
someone,
realizes that. It's like
I know.
$3,000. If you call for an unconscious, for an engine company and an ambulance to show up, it's
Yeah.
like $3,000.
Do you think?
Yeah.
Because that's one thing I think that there's a lot of stuff going on up in the Hudson Valley about like shortage of units and stuff, and people are like, oh, they're calling an ambulance for these BS reasons, and I say like, but have we ever educated the consumer, the 911 caller, of what to do? Like, what's the appropriate phone call to make? Like, what is an emergency,
I
I
know.
don't know
or
that
even
we
the services that we
put out-
provide?
I saw something on YouTube the other day that I thought was interesting. It was like a PSA from Indonesia, and I guess they're like,
Wow.
it's not. I think it's like 995 is the equivalent of our 911 or 999 in the UK or whatever. And it was basically a song about how like what to call. And I'm like, I'm just getting warm. You guys are getting hot. And I'm like,
Nancy
it's
was
freezing.
shivering before.
I know, but
I'm shaking here.
yeah, it's like cold. It was cold in
We
here.
paid the bill.
But yeah, it was an interesting little sing-song commercial, but it's essentially telling people like, no, don't call for this silly nonsense. Like if you have toe pain, like take yourself to urgent care. And there's actually another number that you can call. I don't know if it's like cost effective for people. Maybe you do have to pay essentially for a cab. But I feel like we don't really do that here. I think.
Yeah.
I think they're looking at that in DC.
I think in New York City where we work, it's also like you don't want to run the risk of like having someone sue or like there's a lot that goes into it.
That always struck me as like they all throughout my career I've been running from a lawsuit.
Yeah.
I've never been sued.
I know.
But like RMAs, like I was always told, like as an EMT, like make sure you document this RMA because if it's not, like this is the most, like this one will take you down. And then I get to like a car accident and I have like 5 cars that have rear-ended each other.
Yeah.
Like 17 people have called 911. It's now like coming as like like entrapment and like death, and I get there and it's BS. But now I've got to do. Like each car's got 2 people.
Yep.
I got 12
Yeah.
PCRs that I have to and like I was like, did anybody here call for an ambulance? And they're all like, no.
Yeah, it's just property damage.
And it's like, but yeah, I've always been.
I know. I don't know if any of those actually come back to bite anyone.
Yeah, I
You know
know.
what I mean? Like, I feel like there are like some. Obviously, it's like, okay, well, this is obviously a patient that just don't want our help. 93. And then, like, we had one that was like a wrong door recently.
Oh, yeah.
Where we went all the way up to the 9th floor. We rang the bell, and it was like this older woman was like, I didn't call 911. And we're like, okay. So we go back downstairs. We get on the radio. No, it's not the right apartment. Can we have an apartment? They do a call back. They're like, nope, that's the apartment. We're like, well, there's only this older lady. And they were like, well, write an RMA. I'm like, this is not the correct address. Like, I'm writing an RMA for some old lady who didn't call 911. Like, that's not.
No.
Yeah.
And thank God we don't bill for that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of
No.
places that are billing for that now.
And the
Which is
libertarian
crazy,
side
yeah.
of me is just like, I don't want the government having my information.
Yeah,
Like,
and I'm not
exactly.
going to go ring
You
this
shouldn't
lady
have
who
to.
didn't call 911, who was in her pajamas. I don't want to ring her bell again. Like, that's,
Yeah.
to disturb her a second time for
So,
nothing.
so now we're required to get a lot more paperwork. How was it back then when you were HHC? If you had like a 90, a 96, which is a no patient, like how was it back then? Could you come back and?
We had a log that we wrote things on.
I missed the
I mean,
log.
they still wanted you to do paperwork on all these. One thing about the RMA back then is if you were over 60, you had to RMA.
Oh, yeah.
Which is really, I'm glad they got rid of that. That's
Yes.
really insulting.
It
That you're
was.
over 60, you can't make a decision without talking to a doctor.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
it was really ridiculous. And
And people are
thankfully-
angry.
yeah, and rightfully so. And I think there was a while there that there were more people suing about forcibly going to the hospital than, you didn't take me.
Yeah.
But, and also that, like, I think there was a decent amount of kidnapping. And there was a while where social services encouraged it because I remember going to at least 3 or 4 jobs where we were called by people who were evicting people. And, they wanted us to take them to the hospital, get them out of the way so that they could kick them out of their homes. Yeah. And it was really shady. And my partner, the one that did the intercom thing at one point, I remember he came to work in a suit and tie. And I was like, today's your day off. What are you doing here? And he's like, oh, I'm going for Miss Abramowitz, or whatever. And I'm like, what happened? He's like, she got kicked out of her apartment. I'm going to testify that she shouldn't have been kicked out of her apartment, And he was really active in a lot of things, like that. And, he would call the family up and, because the rent-controlled apartments, those were big ones for kicking people out. And I don't know what the criteria was, but a lot of the elderly, if you went to the hospital enough times, you were out, So the landlords would, because you'd get the anonymous phone call about the crazy woman in apartment, whatever. And, there would be nothing wrong with them. And we felt obligated to take them because somebody called. And usually the elderly don't put up that much of a fight, at least back then they didn't. And it was really little mean, and whoever did these things. And my partner was like, nope, we're not doing it, and he used to call the Department of the Aged on it, and he went to the city council on it, and, he did a lot of things as far as the elderly, because I didn't notice it because I was young and naive, but he was like, this is ridiculous, this is obviously somebody wants this woman out of the apartment, and, or a neighbor would call 911 because they wanted their friend to get that apartment, and there were a lot of awful things going on. No,
not as a lieutenant? No,
not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
What are I'm where I work, I'm a lieutenant, but like what is it like being a lieutenant for EMS in the city? Because I think it's got to be a very interesting aspect of the job in that supervisory role. And I've heard, like some people say like, oh, it's like having like a friend on home base for you, like to kind of help protect the crews.
Hopefully,
like,
yeah. I mean,
what is it like for you in like your own words?
I don't know. It's pretty cool sometimes, and sometimes it's like, what did you call me for? And I noticed that a lot of like the BLS are afraid to make a lot of decisions about like RMAs or a lot of times you get called because the patient wants to go to a particular hospital that the crew thinks is too far away for them. But the way I was taught was always that you take people where they want to go. I was told that by the second in command at one of my refreshers, that's we're a service-based industry and you take them where they want to go. If they want to go there, you just follow the procedure. And I think a lot of people just, are just like, oh, you don't want to go there, and then they go to the closer hospital. And the only way that would be corrected is if everybody went to their hospital of choice and all the units would crisscross across the city, and then probably they'd be like, no, you have to go to closest 911.
Yeah.
But when I worked in Brooklyn, I loved taking people to Manhattan.
Me too. It's like an adventure,
Yeah.
like a vacation for a little bit.
How far can we get?
I know. There was one crew at our station that did the 5-borough tour, and I gave them a certificate of excellence. I felt like that was my job as a lieutenant, so I would reward that kind of behavior.
We've been trying for that ever since.
Yeah, it's really hard to do.
That certificate was very exciting to see.
It's a little easier now that you got a 12-hour tour, but those guys did it in 8.
I know.
Wow.
That was very impressive.
They started in Staten
Island, and then they ended up, I think, in the Bronx either.
But I feel like we've been to at least 3 boroughs in one day. Yeah, we've never gotten to Staten Island, but we definitely do Queens, Manhattan, and Brooklyn in a tour easily, and even Long Island we've done.
Yeah,
but
I saw a crew up at Westchester Medical Center. Somebody sent me a picture of that. They were like, they had somebody in the Bronx right on the border, and they're like, I want to go to Westchester Medical Center. And like,
I'm sure.
We call the boss real quick.
If it's early in my day, I'll take you everywhere.
I feel like for us, like if it's 5 p.m., 6 p.m., and it's rush hour, it's a little harder. We try to tell the family, like, look, it's not that we don't want to do it, but if it takes us an hour and your loved one is actually like very sick, we really can't do that. It would be like detrimental to the patient. But like once we hit like 8 o'clock, I'll go anywhere that you want to go because it's sort of like we're not going to hit any traffic and we can pretty much get to anywhere in like 20 minutes for the most part. At like 1 a.m. Like that's it. The city is your oyster.
Yeah.
What's the furthest hospital you've been to from Fort Worth?
Oh, there was something in Long Island. I think I went to St. Francis once. It was the last day of work from one of my favorite partners who quit the next day, basically.
Okay.
And she was in my med class. And And I was a fireman, and that was in Greenpoint. They were in Greenpoint, and they wanted to go there, and it was actually a big deal because the fire department said no. And then their kids called up, and eventually it changed that you can go there.
Yeah.
You know, but
did they do the relocation thing? So like when we come out of a hospital now,
Oh, no,
we're
no.
available in that area.
no, there's nothing like that.
Oh, so you
Yeah.
run back.
Yeah,
and
and
you
you
can do
kinda
whatever
s-
you want.
Well, in Long Island, you're just not on the map anymore.
Yeah, I noticed that. You go in this blue
And then
hole.
and then all of a sudden you cross the border and now you know. But basically you just went back, and if you got a job in that area,
Yeah.
you had to use your paper map
Yeah.
Remember that?
and discover how to get there.
Yeah, we found that out a lot. We've had people that are driving us and they can't. We're around the corner,
Yeah.
and it's our first due, and they don't know how to get to Woodhull.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it's like it's that big hospital over there. I'm like,
Just look
and
up.
We're circling the block,
I know.
you know, and I have to peek through and give my words of encouragement.
I think
know.
now that we don't have that's that's the culture that's like the younger generation, like that we always had a street atlas in our vehicles, and you had to look at it and know which way you were going. And if you didn't know where you were, like I remember when I was working in Poughkeepsie,
Oh yeah.
like I forget, there was a medic I used to work with sometimes. She was scary. She was military. I forget her name. Irene, yes.
Yeah, Irene, yeah.
And she was like, she reminded me of Ann Sale. She was like very like, we need to do this, and like we were going to some place for a call, and it was a 911 call, and she gave me like the atlas, and I'm like, I was not raised in Poughkeepsie, so I'm like, everything's upside down. She's like, what are you doing? Look at the map. I'm like, and I was like getting so anxious, but I'm like, I don't know. And she's like, she like pulled over. She's like, this is where we are. I'm like, okay. Oh, okay. And then I was like able to figure it out. And I was like,
and Irene, unfortunately, passed away from cancer a couple of years ago, but she had like 2 speeds, stopped and fast. So like she might have pointed out like, this is where we are. That's where you were like 5 minutes ago. She was driving the bus at like 100 miles an hour to get to the call. I remember when we used Jamapco books, and up in the Hudson Valley, we covered four different counties. So like she came out to the bus before map books. I'm like, Irene, what are you doing? She's like, if I have to give directions, I just open them up and I make the map. And she's like, and she would put, because like you'd have a 60-minute response time, and so
You have to cross over pages.
Yeah.
I
And
used
she's
to
like-
get a big map. It looked like the cover of the screen, the shields they used to keep the sun out of your. Right?
oh my
It's-
gosh, yeah.
it was
You had a
so.
map like that?
But I mean, but you did also seeing that. I think it made it more real, like where you are
And
and
the
where you're
distance.
going. Yeah. Whereas now everybody plugs something into their GPS or uses the GPS that we have on the KDT, which doesn't always work that well.
It doesn't
Yeah,
tell you
especially
when
when you're
streets are
moving fast
closed
and
and
Yeah,
the
exactly.
street fairs and the
Like
school
it had me
buses
going through like the Brooklyn Navy Yard one night. And I'm like, there's a gate there.
I know.
Yeah.
I can't go through that now.
I think
at 1 a.m.
like working in Putnam County, I remember the first time I went down to Phillipstown and Medic One, and I said, what do you have to tell me about this place? And they're like, if it says brook, there's a brook. If it says mountain pass, you're going over a mountain. Like, and it's like literally the words, like the street names are going to tell you what the terrain is. And I was like, all right. And I've always said Putnam County was drawn by like kids with crayons. That's just how they figured out the roads. Like,
Wow.
but yeah.
Oh, wow. I know.
What like for so far in the career, like what are some of the memorable events that you've come across, like whether it be calls or just like professional accomplishments? Like, is there anything that sticks out in your mind that you're like, this was pretty cool, or it was like it maybe changed you in a positive way, like and it kind of pushed you even to be that much better at your job?
I'm trying to think. I feel like there's a lot of the good things that you do. You tend to not, because you do so many nice things for people that eventually, like, they kind of all meld into one big job.
Yeah.
And it's kind of discouraging because they change the protocols all the time. And I remember saving a lot of people with Lasix, and now everybody's like, oh, you were killing people when you were giving Lasix, and they're going to say the same thing about amiodarone in the future. And
It'll come back into fashion.
yeah, like we're getting Bertilium again. And, just there's so many little things that you just kind of gloss over because they weren't such big magical moments, and you kind of remember all the bad, terrible things or the funny things, but I mean, like defining moments, I don't know that many that are positive. You know, there are a lot of good things that happened, and like my partner with Mrs. Abramowitz and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, and I just, you know, you tend to always focus on like the bigger things that, like 9/11 wasn't all that great, you know,
Right,
but that
yeah.
stands forward in your memory, you know, and stuff like that. And
There's kids that we work with now that were still in like
yeah, they were in grammar
sixth
school
grade,
or something.
fifth
Yeah.
grade. You know, like my kids, she's like, "What's the Twin Towers?"
Oh no. Like I remember the
So-
first 9/11, you know, when they just
Yeah.
blew up the place and it
Were you working that day or no?
No, I banged it.
Did you get a note?
I watched from television. No, it didn't work. You know, your television didn't work if the tower was out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I found out about it like 8 hours later, but I got some overtime for it after that, you know,
Okay.
but, you know, I should have been there.
Yeah.
But, you know,
What are some memorable? Because I know you keep a scrapbook, right?
yeah. I have some interesting little
I
articles.
know you got a
and-
good one too.
Oh, I could tell you one of the worst things that ever happened that I didn't think was the worst. And it was, this is kind of a long story here. All right.
Okay.
We got time.
I know that we had a third paramedic on the truck he was coming back from something. Like he was a paramedic. He wasn't a student, and he just was required to ride with us.
Yep.
And it was wonderful that he was on that truck that day. And I remember it being a late job, and I was with one of my really good partners, and some BLS was crying over the radio, and you know, like you notice those things, and I was like, please don't let it be us, please,
Yeah.
because we wanted to go home,
Yeah.
you know. And then it was something Victor got called, and it was like, please be 5-7 Victor.
Yeah.
And nope, it was 3-7 Victor, and so we went to it, and when the job came over the KDT, it was really awful just to read it. It said that the twin had been delivered a week earlier, and now the second twin was being delivered, and it was like 22 weeks or something like
Yeah.
that. It sounded like a really complicated OB job, which I don't know if you know, but like most paramedics don't enjoy the the OB.
Do you know how many kids you delivered?
It wasn't that very much. It was maybe
What about-
they were not good deliveries either.
Oh,
Like it
yeah,
was
I
like
don't
6
have
or
any.
7, and you know, like you go to the, you know, you tell people that, and like they were all taken by social services. You know, almost every single
Yeah.
one. Like I don't think I've ever delivered a normal,
Yeah.
you know, happy delivery where it's like, oh, you know,
You have to catch one.
yeah, they were all terrible, and this one was actually not that terrible at the
Okay.
outset, because, I mean, the family was really nice. You know, they were like a typical middle class family. Like they had a beautiful house. They had a son, and the son was excited about the birth of this baby brother or sister,
Yeah.
and you know, you could see artwork on the fridge from the kid, and you know, it was just a nice house. They were nice people. They seemed to be very well educated. It was just the person that was pregnant and her mother who was there to watch the child. And apparently she had some sort of complication where one twin was delivered earlier by 5-7 Victor,
Oh, wow.
and that child didn't make it, and now she felt that this was happening. You know, she knew that the next one was coming. So the crew had already delivered the baby by the time we'd gotten there, and it was like 22 weeks or something. It was very, very small.
Yeah.
And it was a girl, and it was just none of your equipment fits. You know, like you
Yeah.
can't tube the baby. The face mask doesn't fit. It was just very small. It's a very big challenge. So the paramedics that was extra, he drove with the mother and the BLS, and my partner and I were left with the baby. And that was kind of a harrowing job. We didn't really know what to do, you know, because nothing fit. You know, you couldn't tube the kid, but the kid was fighting. The kid was breathing. The kid was like wanted to scream if it could, you know, and she was moving. So we kept her warm, and we did the best we could. And we went to the hospital, and the hospital was very impressed with how well the baby was doing. And they, you know, told the family that, you know, this crew, you know, helped your baby, you know, saved your baby. And we were like very proud of that. You know, we were like, because the other baby didn't make it, and this one made it. And we went to go visit the baby maybe 2 days later, and she was doing really well, they were saying. And we met the father, who was also, you know, kind of nice to us. And the woman was really nice as well, you know. I just have nothing but good memories of that family.
Yeah.
And but the kid was 22 weeks, and you know, a few weeks later, maybe months later, I remember seeing on the wall at the hospital. They usually keep letters of people who write to the hospital saying thank you for treating grandma and stuff like that. And I recognized the name, and it was the mother, and she wrote, "Thank you for all you did, and you did the best you could with what you had, and we appreciate what you did, blah, blah, blah." So I didn't know that the kid, maybe she was talking about the first one, you know. And so a few years later, my partner pointed out to me in the newspaper, because there were still newspapers, she's like, "That's the kid right there." And there was an article in the paper about this family that had basically killed their child, neglect. And it was the baby we delivered. And if you read the article, you'd never know that they were a nice middle-class family that we met, because they totally changed. Like, I believe that this child was just more than they could handle. Yeah. And they turned to, like, crime, basically. Like, they were selling drugs out of their apartment. Like, they showed you a picture of the apartment. The apartment was destroyed. Wow. It wasn't the same beautiful home with the artwork from the children. And, like, the other child had been taken away. Yeah. And this... Like, they'll tell you that when the baby died, she was only 64 pounds, but, like, that child was never going to be a full-size child, and they just couldn't handle it. They just gave it Benadryl constantly because they didn't know, they just wanted to keep her sedated, and eventually it was too much. And that was, like we were, like, so proud of ourselves for delivering that baby, and then to see 4 years later that she died anyway of, like, really terrible circumstances, Like, that sticks with you a little, and that was pretty horrible. But, and it wasn't just tragic about the child, like the whole family just,
went down.
Took a turn.
The grandmother and the daughter went to jail, and the father left and disappeared, and, and it's just awful all the way around. And that's sadly the stuff that sticks with you, as opposed to, like, all the great times when, you helped out so-and-so, and, and that's, thankfully people write letters, not that often, but, sometimes people will be like, so-and-so helped me with this, and then you're like, oh, yeah, we did something nice. And I think just being nice to people in general, is half of the job. Yeah. Because they can,
That's the one thing, is, like, if you're not nice to somebody, they're going to remember you.
Yeah.
And then you go in a bodega to get a Pepsi, and they're going to remember you. Yeah. It's not hard to find us.
I know. You could save somebody's life, but you take them to a hospital they don't want to go to.
No, that's the truth.
Honestly, I feel like even, my mom passed away a couple years ago, and she passed away in a hospital. And, like, it was not the way that we all would have loved for it to have gone down. But, like, I wrote a letter to the hospital because I was so genuinely impressed by the care that they took of not only my mom, but of us, like, her family. Like, that was, like, such a horrible time in my life and, like, the life of my family. But, like, I can honestly say, like, that hospital has, like, a special place in my heart because, they did such an amazing job, I thought, to help my family through this, like, terrible time. So, I think, like, how we treat people, like, really makes a difference.
Oh, definitely.
It makes a world of difference, And there's no reason to be a creep to someone, like, it's like it's one snippet in someone's life and you're a part of it, it's I don't know, they're gonna remember how you treated them that day.
So you came out, you were at 3-7. You were on 3-7 Victor.
Yeah.
For how many years?
3-9.
Like 8. Well, it was it was 3-7 Victor out of 39, I believe. Okay. Yeah, it stayed over. So I think I was on that truck it was also 4-4 Victor for a little while, and but mostly 3-7 Victor, and that was like 8 years. I'm gonna say with the same partner.
That's awesome.
Oh wow.
And I had the other partner. You have 3.
Yep.
There's 3 on a truck, so one partner is the constant, and then the other partners were also good, but for shorter periods of time.
That's what I used to have when I was with the other guys. Yep.
The wild card.
Yeah, you always have a wild card. You have one partner you really like working with, and you're not with them that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what stinks.
And then, but I mean, I was really, really lucky with the partners I got. I was incredibly lucky. Like, it's very rare. Like, there are very short periods of time when I had, like, terrible partners. And I think that shaped my whole positive view of this job, as opposed to, like, other people I know that weren't so lucky. But
well, I mean, a bad partner can sort of...
Yeah, it ruins everything.
Yeah, it can ruin your day a bit,
So I remember you guys had mass pants back then.
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit what they are?
Oh, there are these inflatable pants. It also, like, you used a pump. It was one of the skull stations when you took your BLS refresher.
Yeah.
And it was... the idea was to shunt the blood from your legs to your heart.
Okay.
But basically, if there's holes, we didn't have like too many exceptions on the holes in the chest. Yeah, a penetrating chest injury was one of them. But like, if it was just a little bit lower, you're still shooting blood out of the hole.
It would actually shoot it out.
I mean, it would more like ooze. I mean, I don't remember using them too much for what they were intended for. I remember we rescued a dog with one once.
How'd you do that?
It wasn't necessarily a dog. There was a dog in the river, and somebody jumped in to save the dog.
Okay.
And my partner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we inflated them as an inflatable device.
Oh my gosh.
Wow.
If anybody had found that out,
They did that.
but we got news for that. Saving the dog. There's a picture of me holding this little fluffy terrier.
Okay.
Maybe like there's other purposes for your equipment than
That is, and
originally
that's a lot of
intended.
people don't realize that you can use all kinds of stuff for
Yeah,
different
exactly.
things.
Like I was hoping they wouldn't take the longboards off when that whole thing changed, just because that's a great carrying device.
Yeah.
Or even stabilization, like in crappy ground. Like I like having backboards just to put down because now it's a solid base to stand on.
When you get stuck in the mud.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just
Like the KED, I've always like the original. Rick Hendricks originally designed it to come out of these scoop seats in race cars, out of the frame of the roof. But like, it's a great tool for fire departments that aren't quite ready for low angle rescue, and you can package somebody in that, and there's a little loop on it because they originally designed it for a tow truck to come up on the NASCAR circuit and yoke people out. So like your KEDs are great extrication tools if you need to bring somebody up a shaft or I mean I'm sure the tech rescue guys out there will be like, we've got all these other fancy things, like we tie knots, we don't need you but it is something that's it's another, like you said, a tool in the arsenal that you kind of use.
You gotta know what it's there for.
Yeah.
How quick were you guys putting on the mask pants?
Oh, hardly ever. I mean, I can't tell you how often I used it. Maybe once or twice.
Really? Because when I was in the academy, they're like, we use this all the time.
I mean,
and they were covered. Really?
Probably with other, maybe different boroughs.
I see. All right.
I think mask pants really got in like rural settings is where they really kind of shown
a long
through.
transport time or something.
Yeah, it would give you a pressure, and you could deliver them to the hospital, and then it was like, please don't take these off, and you're like, all right, okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
They would just.
Yeah, when I first started volunteering, they were like under the seat.
Yeah.
And they're like, if you're really bad, you get that box. Okay.
I know. Exactly. But it served other purposes. If you and plus, it was another skill station. It was something to be tested on, I guess.
Did you have wood backboards then?
Yes, we did, and sandbags, which were disgusting and sticky because you reused them and there wasn't any really good cleaning facility.
What did you use sandbags for?
To stabilize the head.
Jeez.
I told you, I remember talking about sandbags.
I'm ancient, I told you. And then the sandbags were always sticky from the tape, leftover tape, and it was just awful. It's so much better now that you have something that actually sticks to the board, and then the collars where you had to size, them with. It was just crazy. I can't even tell you how much organization there is now as compared to back then. Because I remember we were inspected once by the state, and they discovered I feel like they were looking for something to get us on, and there was so much to get us on, I would think. But they got us on not having tools, not having kind of tools like a crowbar or something like that. And I remember right after that we got brand new cases with tools, and they were never touched, as opposed to maybe we could have used more, I don't know, something else, some actual equipment.
Headbeds.
Yeah, we used to change tires in our white shirts, which was the guy used to show up with a truck and just give you the tire and the crowbar and the tools, that you needed, and then you did it yourself. And I don't even think we're out of service for that. I've got to think that once the tire truck showed up, you were like, no, we got to hit that button, or it was kind of ridiculous, I don't know.
Well, I think earlier Peter was hitting on the fact that now if something goes wrong, the truck, you get a spare truck.
Yeah, you get a different truck. Yeah, we didn't really have that. Yeah.
It was when something went wrong, they bought a service truck and then we fixed it.
Yeah. And we did a terrible job of it, which is probably why they stopped it. And the guy standing there next to the truck, he was making a fortune watching you with your minimum wage job basically change this tire. It was just terrible. But then you get filthy dirty. You're wearing that white shirt for the rest of the day. And it's one of the other good things that have changed.
And you had, what, 2-man stretchers back then?
2-man stretchers,
Yep.
which, I felt kept me strong.
Yeah, me too. I kind of liked them.
Because the stretchers now, they're so heavy, like at least the 2-mans were somewhat lighter, and I felt like I was much stronger back then,
I don't
just
miss,
carrying
I
equipment.
came out, when I came out of top class at Station 19, and there was a 2-man stretcher, and I was like, I was like this, and I was sending pictures of everyone. Like, I remember this when I started 2-man stretchers.
You're like
I'm
literally
in New York City, and they
deadlifting.
still
I
show
know.
us.
You know?
It
But-
was
And I
a
had 2
workout,
female partners.
Yeah,
so it was
I
like
know,
3
I
of
know.
us,
And
doing this. I
Yeah.
mean, like,
Exactly.
there was no guy stepping in. We had to do it. I had like a permanent bruise on my thigh.
Yeah,
from where
yeah,
we would,
yeah.
like
Always
rest
bruised
it.
legs,
Be Like, all
yeah.
right,
Yep.
get it up, rest it, and then put it in.
No, and I think a lot of women don't realize how strong you actually are. Because even just every once in a while I'll try to do it, and I'm like, oh, I can still do it, and I haven't worked out in 100 years. And I mean, I felt like going up and down the stairs was a workout,
Yeah.
and I still do. I still take the stairs because I'm afraid of
Yeah.
getting stuck in the elevators. But there's
Gotta get your steps in.
I know.
Don't you call better step?
Yes, I have my Fitbit.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of stuff like that. Like the 2-man, which was heavier.
Yeah.
But your monitors are heavier. You carry more stuff now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even the stair chair, like we have the strikers now with the track on the back of them, which was great for like lugging the stupid stair chair, and it's
It's
heavier.
heavy.
That thing's like 50
Much heavier.
I mean, I remember like I thought the innovation that was like really awesome was when like the Furnos had like the handles that came out. I was like, this
Oh,
makes
wow.
it so much easier because like for a while, I mean, and like I said, I don't want to say I regret working for Alamo EMS in Poughkeepsie because it was great to have an experience where you could like have just garbage thrown at you and be like, this is your truck today. Please tell your driver to warn you when there's bumps because this bench seat has no cushioning left and it's just a board. And like,
Wow.
no.
I know. Some of the vehicles you used to drive would just like you could like backfire them and and that was fun too.
Long lost art.
Oh, but there's a carburetor then, right?
Yeah, we had gasoline vehicles for a really short period of time.
Okay.
And I don't know.
So explain this backfiring
back-
thing.
yeah,
Because there's going to be people who
I
are like,
know.
backfire, what's that? Is that?
Oh yeah.
I thought this was an EMS podcast. We're talking about
I
fire
know.
stuff. But like, what's?
I mean, you could. It used to do it on its own randomly, but you could also get it to backfire if you turned it off while it was running and then turned it back on again. And it would sound very distinctly like a gunshot
Where
wound.
did you do this?
That was also
areas that
Manhattan.
you did this in?
That was Manhattan,
Okay.
and you could do it down like a busy street. If like nobody was getting out of your way,
Yeah.
Sometimes people see your lights and sirens, and they're still crossing the street, and they couldn't give a damn that you're on your way to something important, And sometimes backfiring comes in handy then, as
That's
opposed
awesome.
to like
We need a rumbler. We're gonna backfire.
because the siren's not working,
Yeah.
so maybe we could do that, but which we can't do anymore.
No. Yeah, because they're gonna call about us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either way,
That,
we got the diesel trucks,
yeah,
Yeah.
make it
Yeah.
more difficult.
which I don't know if they are built better, because they seem to break.
I don't know if you ask the mechanics, they like them better. Say they would like fix it on the side of the road. Now he's like, oh, we're gonna put your truck out of service.
Yeah, no, they very much do that,
Yeah.
but and it's lucky we have spares now.
Yeah.
Which, as much as like it's really funny because some of the new people are like, I don't want that truck because it doesn't have a backup camera. I'm like, backup
That
camera.
was-
I know.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
you just had
That
to
was the
have
funniest
depth
thing.
perception.
Yeah.
Before.
But you could change your own mirrors when the mirrors broke. If you just went to the spare yard and got one out, and you could fix it without anybody knowing that you you were
Yeah.
hit. And
I remember when we got a backup camera at this one, I was like, what do you need that for? You can't back up an ambulance, and now I need a camera. I'm like,
I
oh
know,
my
I love
gosh.
the camera, but
I
how
do
you
love
do
it.
that?
It is really helpful.
I know soon we'll be backing up into parallel park spaces.
We'll
know.
do it ourselves.
Well, I used to really not like having to parallel park the ambulance because I felt like my depth perception was not ideal. So I was like, I don't know if there's someone back there. And like now I do know if there's someone back there. And that backup camera, I feel like a rock star when
Yeah.
I pull
Yeah.
that ambulance in. I'm like,
the driver.
yeah, I
I
know how
know.
to drive this thing.
So now you're by yourself. You're a lieutenant. What year did you
Oh, I think like 2007.
took a test?
Yeah,
You
I
did
took
with
several tests and I never took it because I didn't want to. I didn't, I was having a great
You
time on
deferred
the
it,
ambulance.
I guess,
I
right?
deferred it a
Which-
million times. I
Right.
really didn't want to be a boss,
Yeah.
and I really liked what I was doing. I liked my partners. I mean, going to work wasn't really terrible,
Yeah.
Yeah.
except the hours. that you had to actually be physically
Yeah.
there was terrible. But like, it wasn't. you know, if you have good partners and you're just having fun all
That's
day,
the
you
thing.
know, it wasn't really terrible to do, but like becoming a boss to me, like it was like, what am I going to do that for? You know,
Who became a lieutenant first?
I did. And then, it was just.
You were in charge?
I was the original Lieutenant Gwillym, the first. And then he became a boss, and then I had to put N in front of my name. But, you know,
I think your jacket still says.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't have a couple of good role models, I wouldn't have done it at all. Just because, like, when I first started, people were terrible. Like, we really didn't like the bosses. I felt like they were all beat up as children, and they, you know, were using this to, like, have some authority. You know? And I didn't want to be like that, you know. And it was, when I kept deferring it, the only reason I did eventually take it is because my partner that I'd had for 8 years went on Lodi and probably wasn't coming back.
Yeah.
And then I became a mentor truck because that's when that started. Okay. And my second mentor was just a nightmare.
Yeah.
And then I was like, is this the way it's going to be? I may as well work by myself.
Yeah.
So then, you know, that's when I took it. And then afterwards, you know, the first 2 years, I feel like they threw just so much at you, you know, so much responsibility that I didn't think a lieutenant should have to do, like deal with the hospitals.
Yeah, so what does a lieutenant do? When you came out, like, what did you do?
Well, they want you to go to the hospital and tell them to speed things up.
Who are you telling? The crews or the
the idea was if you're not dawdling at the ER, socializing, that the hospital is taking their time.
Okay.
And they need you out there because we don't have enough units, so you have to be in service more. So rush, get out of the hospital. Yeah. And that means dealing with the nurses. And I mean, I still feel it's not my job to tell the nurses what to do. They don't work for me.
Yeah.
It's not my agency, you know. And so you call the administrator on duty, and I've never really had a positive experience with them as far as, you know, what they wanted me to do. But, you know, one of them once told me that just because, you know, you treat your people like animals, we don't treat ours like animals. And I was like, I'm not doing that at all anymore. You know, there's no way that I'll be kicking people out just to shave a minute off. You know, if they really, and plus like the ER time is sometimes your decompression time. And I don't think like that's allowed for, and it should be, you know, the firemen on our side get like an hour after a fire. And, you know, like you could pronounce a baby or do some horrific child abuse job or some horrific burn, and they want you back in service, you know, 20 minutes after you got your paper signed, you know, and there's really no allotted time to allow you to do that, you know, but I think they're becoming more flexible and they're kind of understanding that, you know, more now. But, you know, we had somebody at our station that killed himself that we all knew very well. He was friendly. Everybody liked him. He killed himself. They tell you at the station, and it's like, get back to work, sign back on. What are you doing? Like his partners, you know, you would think if anybody would be out of service, you'd put them out of service, but no. You know, we got to run units. And that kind of mentality is really, really horrible. And that all comes out of the fact that we never have enough units. We never have enough people. There's never enough people to take over stuff. You know, it shouldn't be a tragedy to run down a truck every once in a while, you know. And we run them down all the time now because we don't have enough people. But, you know, it seemed like a more dire emergency to run down a truck ages ago, but it just could be my perception just because of the way they harass you on the phones, which is something you don't, you know, being a lieutenant is, I don't like talking on the phones, period. And then that's a big part of my job now. And
I go back to like just what you were saying about taking the trucks and taking the crews out of service and how like we really haven't started to actually focus on any of those issues of mental health and not until the last couple of years. But even then, like I see this resurgence in the fire service where they're talking about it, but like in EMS. And I remember my most stressful days working in an ambulance was the days where we did serious calls. We dropped them off at the hospital. I was working for a commercial service, so we were doing both 911 and transports. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, I really don't care that you just had this, you know, SIDS call. Money. Like, we need you to go up to South Circle 5 and pick up this vent patient because they've been waiting an hour and a half.
I know.
And you're, like, trying to pay attention to vent settings and all these other things. And you're still very much engaged in that.
And do you want that kind of person taken care of? Your your child that's in a vent or whatever, you know.
Yeah, and it was just, or even me on the road, like as an EMT, I'm still processing this, and I'm trying to drive now.
Yes.
From you know, this hospital to this nursing home or this hospital to another hospital, and you know, it was a few years later where somebody said, yeah, like, have you ever driven somewhere and not, all of a sudden you're there and you're like, how'd I get here?
Yeah.
Like, and
Do that
that's,
on the way home from work.
yeah.
I know.
Like,
a lot.
Yeah.
I know. It's really a shame, and it all really, every single thing that's terrible, I believe, about this job, all centers around the fact that there's not enough units, there's not enough people, not enough equipment. There's just not enough stuff. We don't have enough vehicles. We don't have. It's always because of the shortage that that's why we kick people out of the ER before they're ready. It's why, I don't know, just every little thing around our job is based on that.
What do you think would, like, I mean, obviously, if we could just start producing more units, that would be great.
Yeah.
But it's not. It literally is not that easy anymore because we're not. I mean, I know statewide we're not recruiting enough people into emergency services to replace what we're losing, or like you said before, we're losing people to other jobs outside of EMS, other industries.
Yeah.
So like, but what are some things that we could do just to kind of, I don't want to say stem the flow, but like it's really a giant can of worms. But is there anything like, I mean, even if it's just like you said, like being nice to people, but
Yeah.
Do you mind if I want to say, like, Nancy has been my supervisor since I got there in 2008, and I feel like I'm like, I wish she could stay for literally ever for like the rest of my career. I know. But I mean, I feel like when you have good supervisors who are in there with you, they're not, sitting behind a desk kind of like they're not part of it. Like she and Neil are our immediate supervisors, and like Neil used to be my partner and Nancy's always been my supervisor. And like, I feel like we trust them to know that they have our best interests in mind. And like, I think we are lucky at our station that we have predominantly good bosses, but I feel like I never feel like Nancy looks at me as like, just get out there and do, like, you know what I mean? She's always like looking at me as a person, a human being, like someone that we work together. Like, I think having good bosses is like a big part of that because we all know how it goes, but like, I think what she does is probably not that easy to do. Like, she just is a great person with a great personality. So she brings that to work. But like, there's people there who may not be the best boss because they're not the best person.
Yep.
But
I understand. Like if you just treat everybody how you wanted to be treated.
It's really easy though, like to kind of get distracted. Like if you spend all day trying to fill these spots, on the schedule for the next tour or the, whatever, and you spend all day like begging people to do overtime and covering all these vacancies, and then you finally filled it, and then somebody calls in sick. Like your instinct is to yell at them. But it's really it's not their fault. It's the fault of the fact that we have like a massive shortage of people, and and it's not just people coming to work, because it doesn't seem like they take allowances for the fact that people do get hurt on this job like crazy, and people really, you're dealing with sick people. Like, you're going to use your sick time, and if you're not using your sick time, I feel like you're maybe not around enough sick people, because really that's what we do. We deal with people with infectious diseases who wait till the last minute to get treated, and after you work 20 extra hours on top of your regular shift, your immune system takes a beating. And it's kind of not unexpected to utilize your sick time. And it's kind of like, people are just banging into the beach, and like the outcome is still the same for me anyway. Like, I don't, if you call me, I don't really want to hear your excuse, because if you're lying, I don't care, because either way, I'm stuck with a vacancy. And you can use your sick time. Maybe you need it for that mental health day because you didn't get an extra hour after dealing with the horribly burned person that's going to sit in your brain for the rest of your life, And
so what do you do to decompress? Well, besides, James, who is
beating up your husband.
No, I mean, I think like, just.
You're pretty famous. Huh?
Oh, because there's some, camaraderie and stuff like that. I think I've always felt that like after something terrible happened, like when our friend killed himself, they sent like this mental CSU over. And they were strangers, and we didn't know who they were. They didn't know him. And it was kind of just better, the fact that you just hang out with your friends and talk about stuff. And, and I felt that was much better than, just dealing with a regimented, this is how you're supposed to process grief, and, and talking about it, in front of somebody with certain parameters, as opposed to just, it's always helped me out anyway. And I don't know. I just feel like, the outside, you have to have a life outside of work, and even if you're outside of work, is like the cat, like that was a great distraction for me,
It was.
because she was something else to concentrate on.
Tell us about your cat real quick.
Oh, Killer?
Well, yeah, you have a couple cats, right?
Yeah, well, now we're trying to replace But Killer was a great animal that just showed up one day at the station. And
became a station mascot.
Yeah, and she became pretty famous on Instagram, and she had a massive following. And she just, it's kind of funny because she wasn't very popular, which is why I set up the Instagram account for her. And I felt like people didn't understand them, because a lot of people don't understand, the way cats are. And, they're not really being mean. They're just scared. A lot of stuff that they do is because they're scared and they're trying to defend their little tiny bodies from huge people. And so, I gave her a voice, and I tried to make little funny comments on her. And she developed a huge following, which people used to visit her at the station. People sent gifts constantly. And it was really, nice. And I felt like the outside world got to see what life inside of an EMS station was through Instagram, through the cat, because they got to see that we don't sit around at the station a lot much, and that there's never anybody there, as opposed to, there's a couple of famous fire cats as well that the same people follow, and that they could see that there were always more people at the firehouse, even though there's only there's
Carlo's never alone.
Yeah, Carlo.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. And at our station, they, sometimes it's empty. Sometimes it's just me and the cat, and it's just, they got to see how, stuff worked with us. And I think they got to understand more, a lot more people understand that the fire department wasn't just firemen, that there were EMTs and paramedics, and that it was a separate station, and that we did things a little differently. And I felt it was a good educational tool. And then when she died, it was, the outpouring from around the world was crazy, it was wonderful. And I felt like I was losing all these people when the account, when she, I was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this anymore, that, I'm going to lose all these friends, because some of them, I became personal friends with some of them, and some of them, just through their messages and through their, their experiences, because fire departments around the world there was a fire department in California that asked for help with their cat because they were getting the boot. And I believe she ended up doing
that was
Edna,
from San
Fire
Francisco,
Cat Edna,
right? Yeah.
And so I posted on Killer's page, and her followers just went on this letter writing phone call campaign to get this animal, to stay, and it didn't really work though. But so now we have two new little guys that seem to be inching.
So we had some prospects.
Yeah, we have two little brothers.
What was that cute one we had that everybody got itchy?
Buff. His name ended up being Buff. Yeah, because he was a kitten.
He got everybody itchy.
Yeah.
And he didn't make the cut.
And he was a baby. It's not a good idea to get a kitten because they just run into things.
Yeah, and you don't want them to get hurt, running under an ambulance or something.
Yeah. Our new guys are savvy.
Well,
Yeah.
We've been at it for a little bit over an hour. I've been close to an hour and a half. So we got
wow.
kind of wrap up. But
okay.
yeah. So.
I know. Gone.
Yeah, time to go log on.
So. I know.
But thank you for coming
no
down
problem.
and being the first guest on Rush the Bus. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Nance.
I know.
Thank you.
And James.
Yes.
Yeah, James in the
You
background.
don't have to pump gas, so while you're here, get some gas.
Yeah.
Oh.
Best thing about New Jersey.
Oh yeah. Do they clean your windows too?
That's pushing.
Yeah.
If you go to Hess used to, but
Because
there's
full
more Hess.
service used to imply they
know.
changed they checked your
Sometimes
oil.
I don't want them. It's kind of like if somebody in Brooklyn was like, "I'll clean your window, mister." I'm like,
Yeah.
no, it's
They don't even do that anymore.
But everybody, thanks for tuning
thank
in.
you.
This is Rob with Julie and Peter, and I guess
you.
Nancy.
Thank you.
Rush the Bus. Thanks for having us, and
thank you.
we'll see everybody out there. All right.
Thank you.